So the picture you're looking at right here, as she's capturing that up there, this is our group from Australia. This is almost everybody up front here that's here tonight. From us here in Redlands, California, we want to say hi to you in Australia, and God bless you, and wave to them all out there. Yeah. We're journeying together in God's Word. God bless you in Australia. We love you. As we pick up from 2 weeks ago in chapter 21, it really had a prophecy that was given way earlier when Jacob was blessing his 12 sons. That's found in Genesis chapter 49, where he takes his 12 sons, he gives a blessing over them, and he prophesies over them. And he prophesies over Judah in Genesis chapter 49, verse 10. You see it right here. He says, "The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his." That's the prophecy. Interestingly, God brings that prophecy to life again in Ezekiel when he's dealing with the end of the Davidic rule. King Zedekiah is going to be the last king for the southern part of Israel, Judah, and out of that whole area, and it won't happen again until Jesus he's the one. And so here's what we heard 2 weeks ago in Ezekiel 21:27. A ruin, I will make it a ruin. The crown will not be restored until he to whom it rightfully belongs shall come. To him I will give it. If you remember, we did a whole section on this about the scepter. It was God called it their stick. He said, "I'm going to chop off their stick, and I want to cut down their stick." Kind of like they think it's such a big deal. And what it actually was saying was the scepter is not only the lineage where the ruler would come through, but it was also their ability to govern themselves. From this point forward, they weren't able to govern themselves. If you look through all the other nations that ruled the world, they also ruled Israel, and Israel had to have permission to carry out its own laws. All the way up through when Rome and Jesus was here, Rome was ruling. Remember, to be able to even crucify Jesus, they had to go to Rome to get permission to carry out their law of blasphemy that they believed Jesus had done. So we see this being the fulfillment of this. Now, we're still waiting for the ultimate fulfillment of Jesus coming back, taking the crown, and ruling from Jerusalem. I'm going to have more to say about that as we go on in this here tonight. But let's pick it up. We're going to start with 13 verses here tonight in chapter 22. In chapter 22, it really is remember the book, The Tale of Two Cities? This is really what Jerusalem and this portion of history is. The holy city of God that is going to be described tonight, as I put it in your notes, becomes the bloody city. The holy city that becomes the bloody city. And so we pick it up in verse 1 here. "The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, will you judge her? Will you judge this city of bloodshed? Then confront her with all her detestable practices and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. You city that brings on herself doom by shedding blood in her midst and defiles herself by making idols. You have become guilty because of the blood you have shed and have become defiled by the idols you have made. You have brought your days to a close, and the end of your years has come. Therefore, I will make you an object of scorn to the nations and a laughingstock to all the countries." Wow. Now, this is a powerful indictment that's right here. There is no way back at this point. He can't say it any clearer. He's been saying it for several chapters, but he's saying here, who did this? They did it. They brought it by themselves, and their days are closing out. The years have come to an end. As I just give a little synopsis of where we're at as a country, I sometimes feel this is so true of America. Our days are coming to an end. The years are closing out. I believe we're in an extended period of grace that God's been giving America. I believe what we have right now is that extended window of grace. How long will it last? I don't know. But if my people continue to pray and humble themselves and turn from their wicked ways, He will hear from heaven and He'll heal our lands. Okay, verse 5. Those who are near and those who are far away will mock you, you infamous city full of turmoil. See how each of the prince of Israel who are in you uses his power to shed blood. In you they have treated father and mother with contempt. In you they have oppressed the foreigner and mistreated the fatherless and the widow. You have despised my holy things and desecrated my Sabbaths. Some historians actually say, if you take everything that he says to them, basically, somewhere in this whole process, they've broken all 10 commandments. There's not a one that they've been good with, is what he's saying. Verse 9, in you are slanderers who are bent on shedding blood. In you are those who eat the mountain shrines and commit lewd acts. And boy, here comes the lewd acts, verses 10 through 13. In you are those who dishonor their father's bed. In you are those who violate women during their period, when they are ceremonial unclean. In you, one man commits a detestable offense with his neighbor's wife. Another shamefully defiles his daughter-in-law, and another violates his sister, his own father's daughter. In you are people who accept bribes to shed blood. You take interest and make a profit from the poor. You extort an unjust gain from your neighbors, and you have forgotten me, declares the sovereign Lord. I will surely strike my hands together at the unjust gain you have made and at the blood you have shed in your midst. Whew. Aren't you glad that if you're born again, if your name's been written in the Lamb's Book of Life, when it comes to the judgment thing, when your sheet goes up of your life, it's clean. There's no list of all. This is the list of all the sins of what's been going on through these generations here. And boy, he puts it out there that for generations after this, they had to say, that was such a evil, detestable, despicable time that they were supposed to be serving the God Jehovah, and yet they lived this way. In your notes here, I put 4 things here. Her detestable practices brought the doom upon herself. Who's her? It's Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is in a bad straits because of what the people have chosen to do. Number 2, God makes them an object of scorn, the laughingstock to all the other countries. Wow. Remember when God was pouring out his heart several chapters back? He said, how I wanted you to be the ambassador to the world. I wanted you to take the message of who I am and how I love my creation to the world. And now he's saying, you're going to be the laughingstock to all the countries. Number 3, their sexual appetites became perverted. If you look at these things, can you see any mirroring of other nations like the United States in this? Number 4, they profit from the poor and extort their neighbors, the sin against humanity. One of the things that I love about what I see happening right now in our time of what I believe we're in a reprieve is that if you want to earn an honest dollar and make a decent living, it's possible today. At 3.6 unemployment, oh my goodness. We have more people employed in any other time since 1969. Amazing productivity that's happening, and jobs, and the things that are creating, and wages are going up, and things are happening here. And what was happening for the last several decades? We were doing exactly number 4 here. We were profiting from the poor, and we were extorting our neighbors, and the government was taking and putting more and more people where they were dependent upon somebody else, and they couldn't find a livelihood or a good day's wage. That's what happens when God starts abandoning you. So the fact that where we're at, don't take it for granted. These days may not be here for long. Thank God. Praise Him at night. Tell your family, we're blessed right now that we have such a good economy and good wages and good things. And I know there's always things that people go, I wish this was better. That's always going to be true. But see the hand of God right now. For whatever reason, right now, the judgment isn't continuing to come to America, though it's been stored up. It's been stored up. Let's look at verses 14 through 22 here as we pick it up. Will your courage endure, or your hands be strong in the day I deal with you? I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will do it. I will disperse you among the nations and scatter you through the countries, and I will put an end to your uncleanness. Now that sentence is important for you to see that and underline that. This dispersing among the nations doesn't happen in this 70 years of captivity. He's speaking about after 70 A.D. After Jesus has come, after the temple is going to be destroyed for the second time. It's only within a year and a half of being destroyed here for the first time. But when he's saying, I'm going to disperse you among the nations, and I'm going to put you out there throughout the countries, that's the dispersing of from 70 AD on till 1948. Okay? Verse 16. When you have been defiled in the eyes of the nations, you will know that I am the Lord. Then the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, the people of Israel have become dross to me. All of them are the copper, tin, iron, and lead left inside a furnace. They are but dross of silver. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Because you have all become dross, I will gather you into Jerusalem. As silver, copper, iron, lead, and tin are gathered into the furnace to be melted with the fiery blast, so will I gather you in my anger and my wrath, and put you inside the city and melt you. I will gather you, and I will blow on you with my fiery wrath, and you will be melted inside of her. As silver is melted in a furnace, so you will be melted inside of her. And you will know that I, the Lord, have poured out my wrath on you. Whew. When we forget God, it's not a simple thing. So important. One of the things that God is bringing us back, and I believe He's bringing most of Christianity back to this, to the simple things, is that the church is only a supplement to the family. The family is where we remember God. At the dinner table, at your prayers at night, as you teach them the principles of God's Word and God's laws and these things. When we forget God, when our children forget God, when each generation starts forgetting God, this is the consequence. We become like dross. Allowing yourself to become a symbol of garbage. That's what dross really was to them, is the symbol of garbage. Had no value, no worth. The symbol of garbage. The trash can only be truly removed by the fire like that of dross. They would burn up the dross, they would fire it up and burn it all up. And so what he's saying, our God is a consuming fire. This is New Testament there also, isn't it? This reminder is for all to understand the wrath of God. God does bring justice. You can live as a free will person, but there's consequences to your choices. That's what the Bible spells out very clearly. We're going to look at chapter 22, 23 through 29 right now, and see how he builds on this here. Notice that each time when he brings these, again, the word of the Lord came to me. I know I've shared this in other weeks, but it's so important to realize this. This is not Ezekiel expounding upon a vision. This is God speaking directly right through Ezekiel. When it says the word of the Lord came, these are God's word. If we did it like the New Testament, again, they would be in the red. Again, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, say to the land. Okay, this was to the people and to the priests and to the princes before this for what they were doing. Now to the land. Say to the land, you are a land that has not been cleansed or rained on in the day of wrath. There is a conspiracy of her princes within her, like roaring lions tearing its prey. They devour people, take treasures and precious things, and make many widows within her. Her priests do violence to my law and profane my holy things. They do not distinguish between the holy and the common. They teach that there's no difference. Ooh, that's being taught in our land today. Between the unclean and the clean, there's no difference. They shut their eyes to the keeping of my Sabbaths, so that I am profaned among them. Her officials within her are like wolves tearing their prey. They shed blood and kill people to make unjust gain. Her prophets whitewash their deeds for them by false visions and lying divinations. They say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. When the Lord has not spoken, they're speaking on his behalf when he's not spoken. That's important. The people of the land practice extortion and commit robbery. They oppress the poor and the needy and mistreat the foreigners, denying them justice. Okay. Here he's going to lay out each person's case here. It's almost as if you're experiencing Judgment Day for the different things of this nation here. Cleansing the land starts with the destruction of the key leaders as the false prophets, those that are supposed to speak because God spoke. But if you notice, what did they do? They lied about their country when it was in trouble. This is why Ezekiel was told so many times by God, they're not going to listen, because the prophets in Jerusalem are saying, hey, we're children of God. He takes care of his children. And God was bringing this judgment on them. So very, very serious things that are taking place. The holy priests blurred the lines between the unclean and the holy. The holy priests, the priests that were set apart to minister before God on behalf of the people. This is setting up the end of this chapter here. They're supposed to be between God and the people, ministering to the people, but what are they doing? They're blurring the lines. Today we have such blurred lines. Even Christian kids growing up today, they go, well, they say this is right at school. They say this is right, and my friends say this is right. It seems like society says this is okay, and who's going to lead them in the way if it's not mom and dad? Very important. The officials, these were the princes, this is what they used the name there, only used this situation for their own gain. They loved the civil unrest that was happening as a city's being pulled apart, because in that they could control and make gain out of it. One of the things that all the way back from Clinton's regime through Bush Jr. and then through Obama was something was switching where we used to be controlled as a society through wars. Somewhere along the way, they started learning that the civil unrest within the streets would control in the same way that we didn't have to go to a major war. If people were upset in races, in economic areas, and all these different things, the officials, the princes of our land, those that are voted in that have all this power, can control and wheel where the money goes because of the crises that are being manufactured. And there's been a lot of manufactured crises in America. So much so that now, when we do have a crisis with the border and all the different things, those that are good at manufacturing crises call that a manufactured crisis. It's like the kettle calling the pot black, right? Things in that. All right. So you can see this is now his judgment on the land, and it really is taking it through the leaderships, from the prophets, the priests, and what some translations call them the officials or the princes. And you can see he's letting them know there's no way out. This is doomsday is coming. This final two verses is the most important part of what got them to this place. It only takes a person sometimes to stand in between what's going wrong and what should be going right, someone that would stand up. And that's what verses 30 and 31 is all about. I looked for someone among them who would build up the wall and stand before me in the gap on behalf of the land, so I would not have to destroy it. But I found no one. So I will pour out my wrath on them and consume them with my fiery anger, bringing down on their own heads all that they have done, declares the sovereign Lord. Now, this is really interesting. This is the first time you and I probably get introduced to this, but it's not the first time that this is actually what happens, that God works through a man or a woman that stands in the gap and makes up a difference for the nation of Israel. As a matter of fact, in your notes here, in standing in the gap, 9 men and women scripturally stood in the gap to change the future of Israel in the Old Testament. We could probably find some of the ones that you know. Moses had to stand in the gap a couple times, didn't he? Where he's, God said, "Those stiff-necked people, I'm gonna whoop on them." And Moses saying, "Lord, what will the other nations say if you do that?" So Moses is something. It's worth doing a Bible study and putting who stood in the gap. Even if you Google it, you'll find out that quickly the number 9 comes up of people. Now, who they say are the 9, some actually add people that in the New Testament. Because we're in the Old Testament and this is where it's introduced, I use the 9 of the Old Testament. There's several in the New Testament that do stand in the gap, but in the Old Testament there's 9 there. And I'll give you the 2 women. You got Moses as one. I'll give you the 2 women so you can see if you can find the rest. One of the women, she went into the palace, busted open the doors, and she is Esther, okay? The other one was a judge, Deborah. Deborah was another one that stood in the gap there, made up a hedge so that Israel would not be destroyed. The saddest part of this captivity is that a nation that knew that God would only needed one person. So often you can see, I'll give you another one in there, make it, some of the ones that should come to your mind really easy, is King David. And he did it before he became King David. He did it as a boy, a shepherd boy. He stood in the gap, he took on Goliath. When a nation was scared and thought they were going to be defeated by the Philistine, God raises up a boy. So when it says, I look for someone, if you notice, it's not even having to be a man of stature, that he was kind of like the puny one of his family, that when they came to anoint, they said, yeah, the one out there that's a shepherd boy, he's probably, here's my really staunch warrior type sons, and God used the shepherd boy to stand in the gap and make up a hedge. So don't minimize the power of this here to stand in the gap. And this ultimately speaks to, in the New Testament, that Jesus is the only person that truly stands in the gap between us and God. What the patriarchs in the Old Testament and some in the New Testament, they were standing between a people and God for situations of discipline. But for you in eternity, the only one that stands in the gap and makes up the head is Jesus. Because he stands in the gap, you and I will not deal with what we're seeing in Ezekiel, the day of wrath. The countdown should not scare you. That there's a day coming for wrath, not just on America, but the world, and he will judge the world. It shouldn't scare you because you have a protection. You have a bridegroom that's coming for his bride before them. Okay? So it's very, very important, but it's also, if God tarries, as you look at the Old Testament part of history and things where God did delay his wrath. I shared with you several weeks ago that when we're done with Ezekiel, if we ever get done with Ezekiel, we're soon going to be switching gears in Ezekiel very quickly here. So, something happens here that's very traumatic in Ezekiel's life in chapter 24, if you haven't read ahead. Something very traumatic in his own personal life happens. And then chapters 25 through 32 really deal with the other countries, the non-godly countries, or what most scholars call is what will become the Islam or Muslim countries. Okay? And so interesting that 7 chapters are devoted to how he deals with them and what a danger they are to the people of God. And he uses that term, to the people of God, which includes our generation in that. So it's very, very important as it shifts gears here in just a couple weeks for us here. It starts in chapter 25 on that. But the important part is you can encourage your sons and your daughters that God will use them to stand in the gap for whatever, if they're the one that's brave enough to say, I'm going to stand in the gap for my household. I'm going to pray for my family. I'm going to believe that my household will be saved. That person that stands in the gap there, don't take it for granted to go, well, what will that mean? Yes, each person has their own individual choice in that, but boy, you never know what God's going to do and shape and honor that kind of spirit right there. Very, very powerful. All right. Well, this concludes chapter 22 for us tonight.